Hi, everyone.
Hello again. We're at the end of Genesis now. We're at the very end of chapter 49, Jacob's death. In the last segment, we were going over the last three segments, really going over the entire prediction of what would happen to his 12 sons in later times, what will happen to their tribes, and how varied it was. Some blessings, some without blessings, it would appear, or more curses than blessings anyway.
Tracing their character a lot as well.
And we've made the point frequently that we found grace in this book, and we'll get more on that in a few minutes. But at the end of his life, what you see with Jacob is he's got apparently more faith than he had all the way through his journey till he got to Egypt.
Yeah, and especially in God's promises.
Yeah, the promises, and that comes out very clearly in his last thoughts here before he dies. So we're going to read Genesis 49, verses 29 to 33.
Then he charged them and said to them, that's his sons, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephraim the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephraim the Hittite as a possession for a burial place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is there were purchased from the sons of Heth. And when Jacob had finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed and breathed his last, and was gathered to his people.
So it's very evident that Jacob believes in the promises given to his fathers. He seems to be reflecting upon the original promise given to Abraham when he was still one man and had no children, back in chapter 13 of Genesis, where he was promised all the land and his descendants all the land forever.
Yeah.
And that's why this purchasing of a field from the Hittites, it was so important to the patriarch, to Abraham himself, and has become now important to Jacob. But you might miss the detail that we could gloss right past here, that this field is where his wife Leah was buried, but not where his favorite wife Rachel was buried.
That's right. Yeah. And a lot of times people are sentimental and they want to be buried beside their mate, their favorite. In his case, you would think he'd want
Their
to be
intimate
buried
family, yeah.
with his favored wife, but he doesn't. So to me, it does show you that the prime thought in his mind is the faithfulness of God's promise. He's showing confidence in it to his sons. One day, they're in Egypt.
Yeah.
One day, you're going to be back in that land.
Yeah.
Because it's a promise from God.
Many have made I've observed the witty thought that the Bible starts in Eden and ends in Egypt, or at least Genesis does. So you could think it's a bit of a downer at the end that all of God's people are in Egypt, and John Davis's commentary is another version of that, which is from paradise to prison. Joseph is in prison, but now he's out of prison, and his people though are in prison in Egypt.
And some have said creation to coffin.
That says it.
Yeah.
So the fact that he's got this faith at the end, although his faith has fluctuated, and at certain points it's been feeble along the way, and he's made some very bad choices, but here at the end, he's still hanging on to faith, and it seems to be stronger than ever now that he's seen what's happened with Joseph.
I know it made a big impression on us the first time we were going through the book of Genesis. The amount of space that is given to Jacob, who is the least faithful of the patriarchs. He's the one that has more ups and downs and shows lack of faith and fluctuating faith up and down throughout his life. So to me, it really highlighted the grace of God. It helped me to see that as a possibility for myself, the grace of God.
Yes, and many writers on Genesis have made the point that what you see here is the story of Jacob, who after all becomes Israel, is the story of Israel, the people. in the future. Yes, they end up in exile in Egypt here for 400 years or so, wandering before they get back to the promised land. And yes, they end up in exile again after the period of the writing prophets is mostly over. And now they're in exile again. But ultimately, they, like Jacob, are going to return to the land. Here's a couple of good thoughts. I think Kidner had that thought, right? The one I just...
Yeah, he more or less says that the prophecy really of all of Israel is shown here in this section, so that you can see that eventually they will be returning to their land. So it's like a miniature of the whole plan.
Yeah, that's a nice way to think about it. And this is what Morgan says about Jacob's faith at this point. Again, Israel strictly charged his sons that they were to bury him with his fathers in the cave in the field of Machpelah, with Abraham and Sarah, with Isaac and Rebekah and Leah. This is in itself significant of the faith in God and his passion for identification with the purposes of God. Had he followed merely the dictates of human affection, he would certainly have chosen to be buried with Rachel. But in this last outlook, he accounted association with Abraham and Isaac in the sleep of death of more value. Thus in faith Jacob passed unto his people. Thus at last, after a career checkered from the beginning, Jacob entered into rest. The study of his life reveals little to his own credit, but much to the glory of the grace of God. And yet there was never wanting in his history evidence of the presence of that principle of faith which is the basis of divine operation. The story shines from beginning to end with a light of solemn warning and of tender encouragement. Well will it be for us if we may avoid his mistakes, and yet amid all our failure and shortcoming, it is good to remember that he who is with us is not alone the Lord of hosts, but also the God of Jacob.
Yeah.
That's what we found, is it not, when we first started studying the book of Genesis? Even while you were still going to the Kingdom Hall, the rest of us who were leaving at that point had stopped going to the Kingdom Hall. We're all studying this book together, and we made amazing discoveries.
Yeah. So if you go to our Genesis playlist, the first 15 of the in the series, the first 15 videos, we're not actually starting the Genesis. We're kind of giving you an overview, and so there's a lot of personal testimony in there of what impression we got from reading through the things that it did for us and helped us to see more clearly from reading it, the whole of Genesis.
The first one, what's the title of that very first one? Because it's the first three I think of most often, but the first one has an interesting angle.
How Genesis Cured 2 JWs. That's the first one.
And then the next two, I think, deal with our friends who were younger than us and left at the same time as we did. Actually, they stopped going even before I stopped going.
Yeah, but we all found grace in it.
Yeah.
In the book. That's the highlight.
So check those first 15 videos out. If you don't have patience or time for 15, watch the first 3 or so.
Yeah.
And you'll find a lot to relate to in terms of how you wake up when you're a witness, and what is the thing that really hits you when you study the Bible by itself without your watchtower lenses.
Good.
See you next time.